Excellent. All right. Hi, everyone. It is now 1:30. We'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Bill Goldie. I'm a consultant with the Iowa League of Cities. Looking at the folks that registered, I would say I probably know about 85% of you, so you're used to me by now. What we're going to cover today is the SLFRF program and how to report it. I'm going to also hit a lot on sam.gov because I get an awful lot of questions about that. And some of you guys have received some emails recently about the closeout procedures to close the award early if you fully obligated and expended funds. So we'll cover a variety of things for you. I'll also point out that we did apply for and received IMFOA credit in towards the end of the presentation. We'll make sure that we put the QR code out there for anybody that wants that credit. And I will also point out that the chat feature has been disabled. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask anytime. Those that you have sat through my presentations before know that I kind of stop at various points to make the questions relevant instead of wait until the end. I anticipate doing that. So if you have any questions whatsoever, put it in the Q&A, and every so often I'm going to stop, look in the Q&A, address the questions as we go, and feel free to ask whatever questions that you want. And I think from there, we'll just go from there and we'll start talking about the SLFRF program. So just a quick little recap of what this program was, if everybody remembers. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, each city was eligible to receive funding through the American Rescue Plan Act. Back in 2021 and 2022, each city received funding, essentially two equal payments on a per capita basis. The funds needed to be obligated before the end of 2024. And if you did not obligate them by the end of 2024, you would have got a notice from the Department of Treasury to send the funds back. I don't think anybody that is registered today is in that boat, so you're in good shape. Most cities have spent the funds, but just as a reminder, all funding that you have remaining that has not been reported must be spent by the end of this calendar year. And if you don't spend it by the end of this calendar year, you'll get a recoupment notice from the Department of Treasury when you go to do the report in April 2027. Speaking of which, compliance reports must be submitted through 2027, so each April through 2027, unless you've been invited to close out, and I'll hit on that a little bit later in the presentation. So, and I even put that in here. So late last year, on a random basis, and I can't figure out the rhyme or reason behind it, but they've been inviting cities to close out the reports early. I don't know how they're selecting these communities randomly, but I think the reason that they're not just blanketly sending it to everybody that is fully reported on expenditures is because the Department of Treasury has to do a review. So I bet they're just doing it in tranches of who to invite. And we'll kind of hit the closeout procedures at the end of the presentation, like I said. So final rule, I won't get too crazy talking about this because I think everybody knows this because this has been going on for about 4 years now. The funding could not have been used to reduce property taxes, so you had to spend it on something. You couldn't put it in pension funds, that was prohibited. So a lot of folks wanted to use it. Can we do it for wages and things of that nature? Well, because of vipers, that could have been a prohibited use, so I discouraged that. You couldn't use the funds to repay debt service. You couldn't do it for any type of settlements that you have, if you're in litigation. And the funds couldn't have been used on any project prior to March 2021 when the ARPA Act went into effect, when Congress passed that. So, what I encouraged most cities to do, and I would say predominantly 95% plus cities use what was called the standard allowance. So it provided a lot of flexibility that you can use the funds for pretty much any government service. That could be water, sewer, streets, facilities, instead of just a more narrow way of doing it. And it also simplified the reporting. And I know there's a couple of cities that I worked with over the years that decided to use it that was not the standard allowance. Boy, if you think the reports are kind of a pain in the butt, you should have seen trying to do it without the standard allowances. It was pretty hectic. So Obligating and expended funds, like I said, funds had to be obligated by the end of last year, or excuse me, by the end of 2024. Funds need to be fully expended by the end of this year. Obligated means it had to be under contract. You couldn't just allocate it with a resolution. We're not going to hit on that any further because I think everybody's up to date on the reporting. If you did not meet the obligation requirement, the Department of Treasury would have already sent you a notice saying, send the money back that you didn't report on. And if you do not spend the funds, if you have any remaining by the end of this year, and you'll report on that in April of 2027, they will send you a letter of recoupment of the remaining funds, the Department of Treasury, that is. So the compliance reporting, we're going to get into that. Before we do, get into how it works on the compliance reporting side, I will say you're going to need to have access through either id.me or login.gov. And really what these id.me and login.gov accounts are is anytime that you're doing business with a federal agency, it could be the Department of Treasury, the IRS, sam.gov, the Department of Energy, whatever, you need to be able to access their website. And the way that they credential you to make sure that you are authorized to access a government website is either having credentialed through login.gov or id.me. So what I've noticed with a lot of cities have had a high level of turnover. You might have a new finance officer that hasn't done the reporting before, or a new city clerk, somebody like that. What ends up happening an awful lot, especially in the smaller communities, is that new clerk assumes the email of the prior clerk, and that prior clerk used their login.gov account or id.me account with the city's email address that the new clerk is using. Federal agencies will tell you that's a no-no because these login.gov and id.me accounts recognize you as the person that's accessing the site. So if there's been an email address that was used in the past, it's always going to stay with that individual. So it's not the entity, it stays with that person. So like I said, once the email address is used, stays with that person, can't be used again, which means you're going to have to either use your own personal email address to use login.gov or id.me, or a specific email address for your city that's in your name, like Bill Goldie at cityofames.org, something like that, that's specific to you. So that's been a big problem for a lot of the newer clerks out there. So if you are new to your community and it's the first time that you're doing the reporting, what you're going to want to do is reach out to me and I can give you some guidance of how to get you added to the SLFRF portal, but you're going to need your own specific email account. So there looks like there's a question before I get any further into SAM. Can we make the payments for December 31st, 2026 to be considered spent? How, or can we make the payments considered spent? I don't understand the question necessarily. I think what you're trying to get at, if you have funds remaining, yes, it can be considered spent. What you're going to need to have is documentation showing, let's say you had $20,000 remaining, you used it on buying new water meters, that's your project, and you've got an invoice and you've already obligated those funds to that project. That invoice would be your proof that it was spent. I hope that answered the question. If not, ask it again in a different way and I'll be more than happy to address it. So next thing I want to hit on is sam.gov. So people get a little bit confused about sam.gov sometimes, and why do we need both and whatnot. So what sam.gov is, it verifies that your city is eligible to receive federal grant funding. And you're going to need a sam.gov account anytime that you're receiving any type of federal funds. So obviously these ARPA funds, through the SLFRF program, that came from the federal government. Paid out by passed through the city of, or excuse me, the state of Iowa down to the cities, but that came from a federal source. And even if you guys go after water sewer CDBG funds or CDBG funds for downtown facades, anything like that, those funds, even though you're getting them through like IEDA, Iowa Finance, something like that, they're still federal funds. And for you to be able to be eligible to receive those funds, and getting paid out those funds, you have to have a sam.gov account. So what sam.gov does is verify that your entity, number one, exists, and number two, is eligible to receive funds. So if you received funds in the past and you weren't doing compliance reports, they might say you're not eligible for federal funding because of the deficiencies in the past. So it's kind of a clearinghouse to make sure that you're able to get the funding. So I kind of covered this a little bit in what I just said. The accounts, it's free to register. You're going to get a lot of spam emails of people knowing when your registration date is up, and they'll say, we'll take care of it for you and charge you a fee. You don't necessarily need to do that. You can do this on your own for free. So it's free to register, it's free to renew. The process can be tedious and people do get tripped up. It's not the easiest registration in the world, but I have included a few tips in here for especially when you're going through your renewal of what to do and what not to do, which might help some of the problem. Like I was talking about with login.gov and ID.me, this is a federal government website. You need to have one of those accounts to be able to log into sam.gov. SAM, when you initially register, they assign you a UEI number, a unique entity identifier that would recognize your community. And it also sets up a cage number, which is another verification process that you exist that all federal agencies run through. So the cage code renews every 5 years and verifies your existence. And you probably will get a notification when the cage code is about to expire. The way it was in the past, and I think it still works this way, is it automatically renews and lets you know, and you should get an email about it. So, and to complete the SLFRF compliance reports, your SAM.gov registration must be up to date in accordance with program rules. I know that people had some SAM accounts that have lapsed that have still been able to do the reports, but especially when you're ready to close out the award, if they start asking you about, hey, is your SAM up to date and your registration is not, that might get you in a little bit of trouble with the Department of Treasury being out of compliance. Now, I can help most people that are having issues with registering or registration renewal, at least get you in the ballpark down the right path. But there are some things that I really can't do, and you might need some assistance. So, what I've included in this presentation is the link to their website that is self-help resources, which is a lot of information and a little bit hard to navigate at times. But what I do recommend most of the time is to call the Federal Service Desk when you're running into issues with the registration. So back to the invoice questions. As long as you have an invoice dated before December 31st or prior, that would suffice because that would be the documentation showing that you paid the bill, or that would, in my opinion, that would be fine. As long as the invoice is dated before December 31st, 2026, they shouldn't have a problem with that, and you would be able to report that the next year. I am not going to address closeout questions until I get to that section. So if you could, when you put the questions in the Q&A, try to stay relevant with the topic because I'll address them as we go forward. If it's something I haven't hit on yet, please just go ahead and wait until I get to that point. That way I can stay organized with these. So a little bit more about the UEI number and cage numbers. For those of you that have been with your city for quite a while and you were used to the DUNS number. So back in 2022, they thought it would be, hey, it's going to be a lot easier to use these UEI numbers issued by the SAM site instead of DUNS. So DUNS went away, became obsolete in April of 2022. So like I said before, the purpose of the UEI numbers is for tracking federal awards, contracts, and subawards through an entity. It's making sure that you're eligible. And any entity looking to receive financial assistance, you need, but like I said, you need both the UEI and cage code again. They get a little bit, it gets a little bit confusing with all these numbers that are thrown at you and spit at you during the registration process. But you do really need both because, again, both of them are verifying that you are eligible and your entity exists. So you automatically, and this happened, I would say, in most cities' cases. Back in April 2022, when they did away with DUNS and they started the UEI numbers, in theory, everybody was automatically assigned a new UEI number. And that hasn't been the case for every city I've spoken with, and I've helped them create a UEI number. If you find yourself in an instance like that, let me know and I can give you some guidance of how to get a UEI number set up. But I would say most cities, that had a DUNS number prior, it automatically rolled into a UEI number. And if you ever can't figure out, how if I need the UEI number for an application, like a grant application or something like that, you can look it up in the SAM.gov profile that you have for your community. Your UEI number will be in there. Also, another quick reference is these SLFRF reports, if you've been saving them like you should have been, your UEI number is also listed in your profile in the reports that you've been submitting. So keeping the registration up to date with the proper point of contact, address, all that is vital. Failure to do so can create difficulties when you go through the verification process, especially when Cage is verifying things when you're applying for funding or renewing registration. So don't let your registrations lapse. Try to stay up on top of them, renew them like at least a month out because it sometimes could take time if you do run into any problems. So like I just said, stay ahead of your registration. So here's some more tips. If you're new to your role, need to update the city's record, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to provide you some guidance to at least get you started, give you a couple videos to watch, give you a little bit additional on the tips, even reaching out to me when you've got the registration open, I can help you with some of the, to mitigate some of the issues you might have with the registration. I would recommend that. Here's what trips an awful lot of people up, especially when it comes to renewal. And I can't tell you how important this is, or you're going to end up with like 1,000 questions that are not applicable to city business. And you could end up with verification errors and things like that to where they're requesting more information from your city. When you are renewing, or even when you're setting up a registration, you want to select federal assistance only. Do not accept all awards. All awards means is you might apply for a grant, but you also want to bid on federal contracts. I don't think cities want to do that. And when you do select all awards, instead of you having to answer 30 to 40 questions, you have to answer like 300 questions, and most of them aren't applicable to city business. When you are registering for the first time, the NAICS code that you want to use, it's another code in the SAM system, is 921-120 for legislative bodies. That identifies that you're a local government. And if SAM asks for your NAICS code when you are renewing a registration, more than likely you selected all awards because it's now asking you for something that should be as part of your record and identifying you. My recommendation is delete that renewal record and start the renewal again so you don't waste hours of your time answering questions that are not applicable and That's when I get a lot of the phone calls. And then when I ask people, what did you do this? Oh, I selected all awards. I'm like, nope, let's start over. And then I go get them going in the right direction. And then it only takes them 15 minutes to renew. So what I've included in the presentation is just a number of videos. Actually, the first one is a registration checklist about what you would need when you're registering. These are really helpful, especially the navigating the registration. The new registration kind of tells you how to navigate through the workspace and things of that nature. The third one's the same way. And there's a few more about renewing registration, becoming the administrator of the SAM account, changing the city's point of contact. Those are predominantly when you're going to want to make changes in SAM. And a lot of times, too, what I recommend, if you have access to the account, I really wouldn't start making changes to the SAM account like mid-year. Do it at your annual renewal because that starts asking you questions. Is this still correct? Is that still correct? Things of that nature. So I would address a lot of the updates unless you're brand new and you need to change the point of contact right away. I would wait until the re-registration period. Okay, so moving on from SAM. So back to beating the drum again, you need either login.gov or id.me to access the Treasury portal to submit your reports and do anything else there. So I'm just including the link for login.gov users. There's the link, portal.treasury.gov/compliance. Once put in that link, you'll see at the bottom on the left, sign in with login.gov. You click on that little tab, and on the right, it pops up, put your email address in and your password, and then it'll ask you for your code. And voila, you're going to be on the portal. So there's the address for login.gov users. Same thing with id.me. Here's the portal website address. That's the one you want to access with id.me. This probably isn't going to be applicable to anybody anymore. You guys just want to get the reporting off your plate. I'm sure at this point, since you've been doing it for 4 years now, but this is a quick little reference guide about the supporting documentation that you might need, the NEU agreements. And if you've got question about, so initially when you receive the funds, set up the portal to be able to do the reporting, I'm pretty certain most cities have their NEU agreements uploaded to the portal. It was a couple of forms that you had to fill out and also include like the first page of your, I can't remember what fiscal year budget now, 2022 budget or something like that. That had to be uploaded to the portal. So this user guide kind of covers that, what are those agreements, what needs to be uploaded, things like that. But I would say 98 to 99% of communities don't have a problem with that because it's already uploaded from years ago. Here's one that I've had to help a number of cities with since the inception, again, because you might have a new clerk or new finance officer, or maybe you've added another city official that you want to add to the portal. I wanted to just include a little bit of a video in here about the staff roles for reporting. So you have the account administrator that maintains everything, the contact information, assigns people roles. If you have, a few people that have access to the portal, and what we always recommend, it's good to have the one person as an administrator, but you should have a backup person as an administrator too, in case you ever needed to update the city's record. It just makes it that much easier. So if you're retiring or something like that, and you know that somebody is going to be coming in after you, and you've got some overlap in the training, what would be a good idea, knowing that they're going to have to do this report next April in 2027, is to get in there, add that new person, also assign them as the account administrator to give them all the permissions that you have so they're not going to have any problem with the portal. There is an option in there for point of contact for reporting. All that is anytime Treasury sends out a notification about the SLFRF program, that means you're authorized to receive that email. So account administrator, you maintain all the information. Point of contact, you get all the correspondence from the Department of Treasury. An authorized representative for reporting means that you are allowed to um, fill out the compliance reports and submit all the other reports. So what I always recommend is make sure that when you're setting up the point of contact, unless you have a staff in your office of 5 or 6 people and everybody's going to have a different role, if you have one person or 2 people, to have redundancy, which most cities do have, when you set up roles, you want to make sure that the roles are set up. All 3 roles are set up for the staff accessing the portal. When clicking on the renewing annual registration link, it says it isn't available anymore. Get in touch with me. I will get you the other video. I think that might have been, we tried to go through all the links. If you do find any links in what I have in the presentation that aren't working, email me on the side, let me know, and I'll get you the proper link. And thanks for pointing that out. I'll make sure that that gets addressed in our presentation. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it done before, because we'll send this out to all the attendees tomorrow. I don't know if I'll be able to get it done before then, but email me on the side and I'll get you a good link for that. Thanks for that question. So I hope this link works, and I know it did because I checked on it. It's a PDF. So kind of what I was talking about with the roles and assigning people roles, adding new people to the portal. I mean, if you find yourself in that situation, this link is a PDF that walks you through, slide by slide, hit designation form, now verify this, now do that, now type in the fields. It's a real helpful PDF that helps you get roles added. And if you run into any issues with it too, definitely reach out. I've helped a number of cities add folks. So to complete the compliance report, so now that we hit on sam.gov and logging in with login.gov or id.me and assigning roles and everything else like that, now we're going to talk about these compliance reports that you got to submit. So the reporting portal opens up early April, hopefully April 1st each year. And the reports must be submitted by April 30th annually. Aside from the closeout reports, and like I said, I'll get into that at the end because I know some of you got that email recently. What I strongly recommend is do not wait until April 29th or April 30th to try to submit the report. The portal, let's just say, has been temperamental over the last few years, and you get a lot of people on at any given time where the portal crashes or you can't access certain information, or if you run into an issue like a submission issue or reports not sitting there, if you log on really late in April, you're going to get out of compliance because even if you reach out to the Department of Treasury, it's probably going to take them, especially with the Doge cuts last year because they cut back on staff, 2 or 3 weeks to respond to your email. So I would recommend get it off your plate April 1st, the first week of April, get in there and get these things done and just be done with it. And if you do run into problems, then you're going to not run into compliance issues because you logged in early enough and you knew that you had an issue. The reporting period itself, it starts April 1st and ends on March of the last year and ends on March 31st of this year. So the report for 2026 would have been that people are going to be submitting here in April. That's for the period April 1st, 2025 through March 31st, 2026 for the 2026 report. That's how that works. So this is the screen when you log in with your login.gov or id.me. This is where it takes you. It takes you to a welcome screen, and it's going to have a few tabs on the left side. And it might look a little bit different too because they keep changing the portal every time they create a new report. So I'm hoping this will still be, it will still be relevant, but there might be other features that are in there. So there's two ways to access your compliance reports. So on the left side under the introduction, it also says compliance reports, or at the bottom of the page, it says go to your reports. You can click either of those two spots, and then it's going to take you to this. And what this is your compliance reports. So it's going to show everything that the city has submitted since the program started back in 2022 when you had to start submitting it. The first thing it's going to show on there is any U agreements and supporting documents. I kind of talked about that a few minutes ago. That's the agreements that you had to sign when you accepted the funds and also like the first page of your budget. If your status says submitted, that's good. That's what it needs to say. And I would say almost every city out there is that way. There are a few communities where the status says draft, which means the information was not uploaded to the portal. If you log in and find yourself in that situation where your status says draft or not submitted, please reach out to me because I can get you the forms that you would need to fill out and give you some guidance of how to get those things uploaded. The rest of it in there, what you're going to see under compliance reports, is going to be everything that was submitted. So in this instance, from the screenshot, there was a 2022 report and a 2023 report. And so when you go in to log into the portal in April this year, you're going to see a report that says P&E report 2026, and then the status is going to say draft. Everything else should say submitted. You're going to want the status that says draft because that's the report. Then you're going to want to click on that blue pencil right to the right of draft, and then it's going to take you into the report itself. Federal Service Desk, try calling. It says disconnected. Interesting. Thank you, Jessica from Shell Rock. That wasn't the case last week. I could tell you that for sure because I was talking to somebody that was just talking to them. So, guys, this is what happens with all the Doge cuts and everything else like that. That is interesting. I will actually do a little bit of research to see if there is an updated number, but I wasn't aware of one. And I even looked on the SAM website about the Federal Service Desk number recently, and it was still listed that number too. That's interesting. I guess Doge isn't about government efficiency after all. So what we're looking at here is, again, you go from your draft, you click on that, you go right into here. It brings you to this spot. So the introduction and bulk upload templates page. So like I was talking about with the NEU agreements, if there is something you need to upload, this is where you would take those forms and upload it in this area of the reports. What you're going to want to focus on is you want to get into the recipient profile when you're filing the report. You really don't need to do anything with the introduction and bulk upload. And when you click on that recipient profile, it's going to have everything about your city that's in the portal. Your city's name, your UEI number, your tax ID number, your address. Everything is going to be populated in here of when you first set up the SLFRF account. The one thing where a lot of communities are getting thrown error messages when they go to submit the report is the column that says fiscal year end date. You need to make sure that you click on that little calendar in the bottom right corner of that column and select June 30th of the applicable year. So for the 2026 report that's going to be done in April, you're going to want to say fiscal year end date of June 30th, 2025, because that's kind of the reporting period. I take that back. You could either do 25 or 26. You just need to make sure that you update that because if you don't, or if you leave it blank, when you go to submit at the very end, it'll tell you have an error message. And I can't tell you how many people called me up to say, hey, where's my error in my report? And we went back and found out it was this fiscal year end date column. So if you look underneath that, and I know it's a little bit hard to see on the presentation on a computer, but it says, is the recipient registered in sam.gov? You should be able to say yes to that question because your registration's up to date. If you say no to that question, you might get contacted by the Department of Treasury, and there's a chance that they might not allow you to submit the report. So hopefully everybody's sam.gov registration's up to date. So that should say yes. So when all that's done, you hit save, and then after you hit save, at the bottom right is hitting next. And next takes you into the project overview page. It kind of looks like this and this. So I made this a little bit. This was a new feature that they added last year, and this was throwing people a lot of error messages too. So on the project overview page, above this slide that I have that we'll talk about in a minute, you have this question. It does a summary of the projects that you created, the amount of money that you have obligated and expended, and what you're going to want to say is yes to the question up to and including this reporting period have revenue replacement funds been allocated to government services and reflected in the project below. What we're talking about here is that standard allowance to simplify the reporting. So if you're doing it that way, which almost every city is, you want to make sure that you're answering yes to this question, not leaving it blank. This is also what's been tripping people up and getting error messages at the end. And it's like, where in the world is my error? I've done everything right. Well, you didn't answer this question, which is why you're getting the error message. And trying to figure out where the error is when you're on the certification page, it really doesn't give you a lot of information. So I'm just letting you know if you run into an error, this is where it's at. So make sure you answer the question as you're doing your report. We're not going to get into of how to add new projects because you really can at this point because all the funds had to be obligated, meaning the projects created, as of the last report. So I don't even think it's going to give you a feature to add a new project. So the only thing that you can do if you have funds remaining, or even if you don't, is edit existing projects. So no more adding a new project like it says on the screen in here. I think that tab's going to go away with this new report. So all your projects are going to be listed in that blue box. Some cities only have one project. There's other cities that parsed it up 10 different ways. That's fine. But each time that you have a project, it's going to make you go in and physically open up that project to be able to proceed. So if you look on this screen, there's an illustration. You got some green check marks, and then you've got yellow pencils. Yellow pencil or a red pencil would mean you have to edit that information before you can move forward. So the way that you're going to edit the information is you're going to click on that yellow pencil, and it's going to open up an edit screen for the applicable project that is yellow under project status. And this is what the edit screen looks like. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, if you're taking the standard allowance, and your project should already be set up this way if you've been doing the reporting appropriately, is you're taking category 6, expenditure category group 6, revenue replacement for the project expenditure category group. And then project expenditure category would be 6.1 provision of government services. So that defaults to the simplified reporting for government services, like we talked about. So what you're going to want to do is you've got 4 columns, and I'm sorry that I've got a text box with some information on here that's covering it. But if you look at the left side of the screen in the middle, it's starting to talk about cumulative obligations, cumulative expenditures, then it says current period obligations, and then the next column says current period expenditures. So your total cumulative obligations would be how much you've already obligated to that project and you've already have that done and that's set. That shouldn't change. Let's say that you were spending $20,000 on a project and that's your cumulative obligation. Let's say you've only reported $10,000 in spending of that 20,000, so in a prior period, but you're going to produce another $10,000 in this period to equal the 20,000, if that makes sense. Then your total cumulative expenditure, because of the 10,000 that you reported on before and the $10,000 that you're reporting on now, that cumulative expenditure total would now become $20,000, just like your obligations. For this reporting period, you're not doing any current period obligations because you've already obligated the funds and you had to prior to December 31st, 2024. So that's going to be a zero. You cannot leave that field blank or it's not going to allow you to be kicked out of here. You got to actually put a zero in the current period obligation field. At least that's the way that the prior reports have been unless they fixed it. In the current period expenditure field, if you're reporting $10,000 of expenditures in this year, it's going to be $10,000 in the period expenditures, and that's how it would be filled out. So again, 20,000 cumulative obligations, cumulative expenditures. If you only reported 10 before and you're reporting 10 now, the equal to 20 would be $20,000. Current period obligations would be zero. Current period expenditures would be 10 because 10 plus 10 equals 20. What a lot of people have been doing for the last couple of reporting cycles is because they spent their ARPA funds pretty quickly, like on a water, sewer, or street project, which is understandable. So if you don't have anything to report like new expenditures, you're still going to have to go in, edit these by clicking on the yellow pencil, getting into this edit screen, and filling out obligations, current period obligations, put a zero in that column and a zero in the current period expenditures, and for it to work properly and you to be able to certify and submit this thing. The program income earned, program income expended, there's a few other program income things that they've added. It's not what you think it is. It is not applicable to any U communities in almost every instance. It has to do if you're like collecting rent on something. There's like very limited situations. People were thinking like program income earned and expended. That means it's the money that I'm collecting on the interest as the ARPA funds have been sitting in whatever account I have it sitting in. That's not the case. You don't want to put anything in those fields whatsoever. Leave them blank. Don't put anything there at all. The other thing it's going to make you do is status to completion. When you have now completely expended the funds, which you would be, the cumulative expenditures, in this reporting period or next, you're going to want to hit that drop-down menu from not started and report on your progress. Is it 50% complete? Is it 100% complete? Whatever. You'll select the appropriate thing there. And then when you're done filling out the fields, bottom right, you hit confirm project. And then once you hit confirm project, this is what you should be seeing on your screen. Any yellow or even red boxes have now all turned green. So if you have all green, that means you're able to move forward. You don't have any errors. You're good to go. I will say this, if you did not take the standard allowance, and I fielded a number of questions like this, and you've edited your projects, and now your project status is green, but you have yellow still after you did the editing and obligation status and expenditure status, that means you did not select from this page category 6 for revenue replacement and category 6.1 for provision of government services. You selected infrastructure, administrative, whatever, which is why you might end up in yellow instead of green in these columns. If that's the case, all you would need to do is go back into the edit of the project status, change your expenditure category and project expenditure category group and project expenditure category the 6 and 6.1, and that will clear it up. Should the current period be April 1st, 2025 to March 31st, 2026? Yes. That's the current period. The new period that you're going to be reporting on here in April is going to be from expenses that you're going to report on from April 1st, 2025 through March 31st of 2026 this year. The portal again opens up April 1st, and that's your reporting period. So once you get all green, that means you're good to go. The next, you'll hit next, and then it'll bring you to this page, which is the revenue replacement page. So again, what we're talking about here is just making the assumption everybody on this call took the standard allowance to simplify the reporting. And for the question, is your jurisdiction electing to use the standard allowance up to $10 million? From that little drop-down menu in the blue box, you want to say yes. That's what you're doing. After you say yes, you're going to hit, this is what's going to pop up. So it goes from there to there. Then you're going to have some other questions that you need to fill out. You can't really see it too well on here, but revenue loss due to COVID is the next question. So that's the amount of your ARPA award. You're probably not going to know that off the top of your head, but the way to tell is if you look at the little legend on the right side of the screen that's circled in red, it's got your exact amount. So you're hopefully when you go in to do the reporting, this page stayed the same and you just got to verify it. If not, that your award amounts in the bottom right of that column were placement funds used for a pension. Remember, that's an ineligible cost. You want to make sure you say no. Then you've got a field to put a little bit of information about your project. You could provide some detail, use the funds for a street project and a new roof at City Hall, whatever. So you want to put in how you spent the funds, kind of describing your projects. Very important, after all this information's filled out, you want to hit save right underneath this, because if you don't hit save right underneath that little text box, I know some people have gone to submit, they didn't hit the little save bar, got to the submission screen, they were thrown error messages, it didn't save the information. So anytime you see save in the portal, hit save. So after you hit save to this, bottom right, you would hit next. And before I go, just want to make sure, let's see. Our city is on a cash basis. It would not make payments until 4/1/25, not just invoices for services, projects. You can talk to me a little bit offline about a question that you might have with this. I think you're overthinking it. If you have an invoice that you are going to pay that was received between April 1st to March 31st, you're fine, and that's what I would report on for expenditures. You just need to make sure that you have good documentation showing the invoices that balance with what you're reporting in there. The Department of Treasury isn't necessarily worried about when you cut the check, physically cut the check, or anything else like that. They're going to look at invoices if they ask for any documentation. And quite honestly, and I'll get into this in a little bit, I can't imagine, because every city in the country received ARPA funds, that they're going to be doing an awful lot of auditing, but you're going to need to retain records just in case. I hope that addressed the question. Okay, so after you put in information about your project, you make sure you hit save, you hit next, brings you to the certification page. So, and I don't think I have it in this presentation. No, I don't. So there is something in here that I'm going to point out that a lot of cities experienced last year, that if you've reported all your funds being obligated, which they were prior to this report, and now you're reporting the remaining funds as fully spent, when you get to the certification page, you might get a pop-up text box that says, you have reported all obligations and expenditures. Are you ready to close out your SLFRF award? You want to make sure that you say yes to that question because it might give you an opportunity to close out the award early. It even says, like in that little text box that pops up, by doing so, by requesting this doesn't necessarily mean you'll be invited to close out early. You'll still have to do the compliance reports. Well, like I said earlier in the presentation, and I'm going to hit on in a minute, the Department of Treasury, for folks that have fully obligated and fully expended on a random basis, have been inviting folks to close out early. So if you do get that text box that pops up, you want to say yes to that I want to close out my award. So once you arrive at the certification page, you're going to see a text box at the top that's going to show how many projects you have. So in this instance, there is only one project. For complete, it should say 111. If anything says incomplete, that means that you do not have a completed field and you're going to need to go back and fix it. Or when you go to certify, you are going to be thrown an error message. And where you would go back to fix it is, we'll go back to that project overview page again, is this is where you're going to want to look first. If you have any incompletes, the first one of that one would be project status. The second one of that one would be obligation status. The third one of that one on the certification page would be expenditure status. This is telling me that one of these fields or two of these fields is not green, it's still yellow. So that's why you might see something on this page that says incomplete. If there's any ones in those columns, go back and look at that project page, and that's where you'll find your mistake. So then you're gonna see this big statement underneath that, falsifying, is a felony and this and that, and do you understand what you're submitting, blah, blah, blah. Your name and title and phone number can be at the bottom. Sometimes it's just the person's name and phone number. If you are submitting it and you're noticing the prior city finance officer's name and something like that, I don't know about you, but I would not be comfortable submitting any type of thing to the federal government in somebody else's name. That means you're using their credentials to log in. It's recognizing them as them. You might want to get in touch with me about how to get you added to the portal and how to reach out to the Department of Treasury before submitting in somebody else's name. That's just my 2 cents on that, but you just want to make sure it's in your name. And when you're ready, you notice everything is correct. You click certify and submit. But before you do, this is going to be before the certify button. And this is something new that they added last year. So underneath what you'll see with your name and everything else, you're going to see these two questions that need to be answered before you can hit certify and submit. And one is about the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. The other is about alternate compliance exam. So the Audit Clearinghouse is any city that receives federal funding of over $750,000 and within the last fiscal year is required to have what's called a single audit done. It's an auditor coming through and looking at, auditing the funds that you received to make sure that it was done, that you spent it correctly and whatnot. So you're going to be required to do it with a significant award. If you received $350,000 and you've spent the money 2 years ago, you're not going to need to worry about an audit. But if you are getting into territory where you know that you received more than 750 in federal awards in the most recent fiscal year, and that's not just these ARPA funds, that could be for airport funding that you get, any funding from the DOT. If anything accumulates more than 750, you need an audit done. So if you need an audit done, you need to be filed on what's called the Federal Audit Clearinghouse about this, and you're going to engage an auditor and say, hey, get me the audit done. And when they do that, they get you as part of the clearinghouse. So even if, let's say that you need an audit done, you reached out to the auditor, you're not getting the single audit done yet, you're not on the Federal Audit Clearinghouse yet, and you say no to that question, but they give you an opportunity to put a comment in there saying, I know I need a single audit done, engaged an auditor, the funds will be audited. That's been a sufficient answer for the Department of Treasury. So the alternate compliance exam engagement. So instead of doing the single audit requirements like above, they created this convoluted way to provide alternates compliant exam. And I've known a few cities that have tried that method. And from what I understand, and I don't know much about it, it sounds like it's worse than working with an auditor to get a single audit done. So if you are in audit territory, just reach out to whoever does your annual exams or periodic exams and let them know that you need an audit. After, so from this page underneath it, you answer both of these questions. Have you expended the award? Yes. Or excuse me, do you need an audit? From the drop-down menu, you would say no to both of these or yes to one with an explanation and no to the other. You need to put something in these fields from the drop-down menu or it's not going to let you submit. And when you fill those two fields out, you hit certify and submit, and this is what pops up on your screen. If you are sure, then click submit. So it makes you do it again. Are you sure you want to submit? Yes, boom. So hopefully this is what you see after you submit the report. This right here is a nice little survey that you can tell them how great it is to navigate around the SLFRF portal. You don't have to fill it out. It's optional. Some cities have, most cities just cancel and get away from it. And when you cancel to get out of it, you'll end up getting a warning message telling you, hey, you're on a government website and you can just dismiss the warning and log out. But before you log out, you're going to want to print up reports. So after that survey page, what you're going to want to do is go back to the home page, what you're seeing on the left there, go back into your reports, and then you're going to want to download that report that you just submitted. And if you haven't done this for the other reports, I strongly encourage you downloading everything that's in there if you haven't done it before. And you're going to want to save all this information, your reports, all your invoices for payments, any contracts when you were doing your obligations. You want to save all that information. So best practice is go in, print it up, put it in your folder, and that way you have a copy of it because you have to save these materials and all materials of, for all prior reports, for everything that you've done with this for 5 years after the grant program ends, which is 2032. The grant goes through the end of December 2026. So you're going to have to keep this until the beginning of 2032. Save it electronically or save it in paper, doesn't really matter. Just make sure in case you were to be audited that you have this information. Under review before audit clearinghouse, should the total be adopted budget same as the total obligations and expenditures? Well, under the review before the audit clearinghouse, should the total adopted budget? Okay, Alex, I get what you're saying. No, when you're doing the standard allowance, and what Alex is talking about is back when you're like creating projects, they're asking you for adopted budget. I've always recommended that folks do not put anything in there. If you could see this page, don't put anything in for the adopted budget because a lot of times this is creating error messages. It doesn't matter if the project costs $3 or $4 million. if you put $100,000 at that project and that was all the ARPA funds that you received, and you don't have an exact number, it's not a problem. It even says when you're looking at that screen that that field is optional, which is why I don't think it really matters. So I don't believe you need to put your, as it relates to the budget clearinghouse or the audit clearinghouse question, you don't need to have an adopted number. What they're worried about is the amount of federal funding that you received. If you received over 750 in the last fiscal year, which Alex, I assume that you did because you and I have spoke about some of the stuff going on there, you're going to need a single audit done. But just say yes to that, and then it's going to give you an opportunity to fill out some more information when you say yes to the federal audit clearinghouse question. I hope that answered it. And if it didn't, feel free to reach out to me and we'll discuss what's going on. And yours is 0. So again, leave that when you're in that project edit screen, leave the adopted budget blank, and that shouldn't create a problem. If that doesn't make sense too, please reach out. Regarding the audit clearinghouse question, I'm assuming this is the upcoming report. We'll say your most recent fiscal year. Yes, it's going to be your most recent fiscal year. And I've been getting a lot of that question because I know auditors are a little bit behind. We may not know yet if we're going to reach that threshold. What I would say is if you know that you are when you're going into doing the report, I would report yes. And then it's going to give you another opportunity to explain in more detail. I would explain in there, I selected yes, but we may not need an audit. We will not know for certain, until July or August or whatever. That's how I would cover myself in that instance. All right. Oops. So we got to that screen. Go back to here. Oh, what people are going to want in a minute. So again, save all your stuff in a folder, save it paper copy, save it electronically, whatever you want to do. Just make sure that you have all this information, have all your invoices, have all your contracts in case they ever were to ask you for it. I don't know. I don't think Grace popped it in chat. That's okay. If you want IMFOA credit, I mentioned this at the beginning of the workshop, or excuse me, the webinar. Here's the QR code. Feel free to give it a scan. I'll give it a minute here so people can do what they need to do with the QR code. Good opportunity if you have any questions to this point before we get into closeout reports and a few other things. Go ahead and pop it in Q&A. And we're getting pretty close to the end, guys. A little over an hour, so not too bad. All right, I'm going to move on from the QR code. If anybody still needed it, let us know. I'll make sure that we come back to that. Just put it in Q&A and we'll make sure I come back to that code for you.
I'm gonna get it put in the chat, Bill. It's just fighting me at the moment.
Okay. Well, if not, that's why I put it in my slide, have some redundancy just in case. So it looks like Grace and Bill know what we're doing. All right, closeout reports. So there was a question I did save from the chat early on. So we logged in to check for our closeout, says we have no applications eligible to close out. The funds were fully spent and reported last April. Do we need to just wait for the invitation, or is there anything that we can do to initiate the process? Excellent question. So like I said, I have no idea how they've done this, but they have randomly started inviting folks to close out the reports. And this started happening, I want to say back late September or October last year. And it's on a very random basis. There's some communities I have spoken with that are 25,000 people. There's another community of 210 people have been invited, but there's other cities that have not been invited. So my theory to this whole thing is who got the invitation. It might be in the order of who filed the compliance reports first, and they can't invite everybody all at once because the Department of Treasury has to review the closeout reports as they come in and to be able to close them out. So they can't just flood it out there to everyone and get like 30,000 cities around the country saying, we want to close out, we want to close out, we want to close out. So it's my understanding if you log into the portal and you're not seeing anything, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute, and you're not seeing anything that says eligible to close out or nothing's available, that means you haven't been invited yet. There is nothing that you're going to be able to do to prod them. They're going to have to invite you. So if it's not there, you can't do it, unfortunately, which means you're going to have to go back, do the reports for this year, and just put zeros in the field for obligations and expenditures, kind of like what we were talking about, and submit the 2026 project and expenditure report. At this point, from the emails that people have been forwarding me that were invited to close out and they were going to do some webinar to the Department of Treasury, it looks like they're only accepting the closeout reports for people that have been invited until this Friday or Saturday. So the likelihood of being invited to close out at this point is minimal, if that is the case. So if they're stopping the closeout reports as of this week, you're just going to have to wait till April 1st to do the project and expenditure report. So if you have been invited to close out and you got that email the other day saying, hey, we're having a webinar about this, and I kind of suggested, listen, this is a real simple, easy process. I really wouldn't waste my time registering for the webinar. Just follow these instructions. This is like the simplest thing about this program that's ever been created, thank God. So what you would do is you're gonna sign into the portal, and when you get to the introduction page, instead of going into compliance reports or anywhere else, bottom left, you're going to click on closeout reports. And when you click on that, it's going to pull this page up. And this is kind of what I was just talking about based on the question and where it was determined there wasn't anything eligible for closeout. So the blue box on this page where it says eligible for closeout, if you are allowed to close out the reports, the status is going to say ready for closeout. If you aren't ready to close out, the Department of Treasury hasn't granted you access, it will say not available or whatever. So if it says ready to close out, the first column at where it says application recipient ID, you're going to put a little check mark next to that RPC number, and then hit the little tab underneath where it says request to close out. Once you do that, brings you to this screen that says SLFRF closeout. You're ready to close out your award. Say yes. Next screen, after you say yes to that question, is going to pull you to a text box with two columns. One's going to be a project summary, which is going to be just about your cumulative obligations and cumulative expenditures, whatever your city received, that's what it says in those fields. The tab that you want to confirm is the second tab, which is called SF425, the Federal Financial Management. So this is used anytime that you get like you're doing closeout on federal funding. This SF425 form is how to balance everything out. And this is required to close out a grant. So you click on that SF tab. This is what pops up. So it's going to be a bunch of information about your city. And in the columns in the top right, you can't really see them great on the presentation. It's going to equal what your award amount is. So money in and money out, essentially. So if your award was $100,000, it should say 100,000 in both of those columns. And then cash on hand that's left should be zero because you fully spent it. And if those columns match your award and it says zero, that means that you're good to go. So the next thing underneath this table is going to be this question. Yes, you're going to check yes, the data in the table above is accurate and final, meaning your award is matching, which it should. And if that's the case, you say yes to that. It brings you to this screen. It says, once you confirm, this is your final P&E report. Treasury will review whether your submission is ready for program closeout, will notify you if additional information is needed to confirm closeout, blah, blah, blah. So essentially, you're going to say yes to this question. It's going to bring you to this screen, and this is optional. But if you wanted to describe how you use the money for your community, if you have any success stories that you want to share, that I'm sure that they would use in any type of literature about the SLFRF program and the ARPA funds that were distributed, feel free. It's optional. So if you don't want to do anything there, just hit bottom right, confirm, and boom, when you go back into closeout reports, it's going to show this. It's going to show your status as closeout in progress. So when you see closeout in progress, that's in the Department of Treasury's hands. They're going to take a look at things. If they need any additional information, maybe like your UEI number from Sam is missing, and they might say, hey, before we can close this out, you need to give me the UEI number or whatever. I don't think I haven't heard from any city that has been finalized on the closeout where they've asked for any information. I think with the standard allowance, if you actually did the reporting properly, they're just going to say, okay, you have to keep your documentation. Okay, we're good to go. I haven't heard of anybody getting questions yet. The one thing that I could see triggering it though could be SAM related or UEI number related. Again, keep your SAM up to date, folks. So here is their self-help resources, which are pretty convoluted, but there's the link for it. If you run into technical difficulties using the portal, you're getting booted out or whatever, you can email the Department of Treasury. If you're having access issues, you can email them as well. If you are having a problem accessing your reports because you're new or you know that you're not going to be able to, just reach out to me directly and I'll help get a email together for you that you can send to the Department of Treasury that's going to get you access. So don't hesitate to do that. But but feel free to reach out to them. Trying to call the number, it's probably going to be like the federal help desk with Sam. That number might not be working anymore either because of the Doge cuts. And really, people that have ever tried to call the number before, what I heard, nobody would ever answer, or if you were able to leave a message, nobody would call you back. But emails, they're a little bit slow, but they will get back to you. It could take some time. And again, the later that you get into April with questions, the busier that they're going to get on responding, and it could take a couple weeks. So log into the portal early. Before I get into this, let's see, you got another question here. If you do the early closeout, it looks like you don't need to do a report this year. Is that correct? Yeah, John, that's correct. So when you go to confirm that submission, it even tells you you're done doing it. And if they need anything else from you, they're going to ask you for that. But yeah, that's my understanding of it. You're good to go. You're not going to need to log in April anymore. They're not going to request information. And when you actually you'll get a confirmation when you do the closeout too that you're in process, your closeout's in process. And some cities have gotten notification within a few days of a letter saying you're completely closed out. Now you just need to follow the terms and conditions, meaning keeping your files for 5 years, and you're good to go. Other cities, it's taken like 7 or 8 weeks to get the confirmation letter back. And, people, Bill, I closed this out, weeks ago. And then I was like, I have no idea why it's taking so long. And then 2 days later, they're getting the letter saying you're officially closed out. But John, yes, if you, and because it does say that on the closeout report, that you can consider yourself, whoops, you can consider yourself being closed out. If you look at what it says here, once you confirm this is your final P&E report, Treasury will review your submission. So no need to log in April. All right. So a little more about best practices, and I'm going to hit on this again. The likelihood of any city getting audited on these ARPA funds through the SLFRF program is, you know, it's very limited, it's minimal, but you're going to want to make sure that you have the proper documentation, because if they just pull people at random, cities around the country at random, they might request that you have the information. So having the NEU supporting agreements, having all your invoices, all the contracts of your obligations and expenditures, all the reports that you've done, you're going to want to make sure that you have that in an ARPA file. And you need to retain that information, like I said, for 5 years. So make sure that you stay organized. If you haven't done so now, now's a good time to get all this stuff together. So the other thing is too, by having everything organized and in one place, if you do retire or move on to a different city or go into a different profession, just move on. The next person coming in is going to have to pick this up potentially and file the report, in April 2027. And there's been an awful lot of new clerks and finance officers out there that I've been in touch with that, I would say a few dozen of them, that because the prior um, clerk finance officer didn't get him access, didn't get him the proper information, I've had to help them get added to the portal, and it's been kind of a nightmare for somebody new coming in. So that's also a really good reason to make sure that you have a folder for the new person coming in if the primary person leaves the role. So what I would recommend, and I wouldn't share this with, don't leave your login.gov or ID.me credentials with a new clerk. I mean, remember that's applicable to you as the individual. They'll need their own, but everything else you're going to want to make sure. And really too, if you know that you're going to be leaving sometime between the end of April this year and April next year, and the new report or a closeout report's coming, go back and add them. I'll go back and show you what I'm talking about again, but go back and use the designation form to add them as a staff member that is going to be able to access these things. That'll make life an awful lot easier for your successor. So something else I wanted to throw out there about that. And last page, there's my email address, there's my phone number. Feel free to call the cell phone. That's fine. You can call the league office. If you call the league office for me, it's going to get dumped to my email anyway. Then that cell phone is a business cell phone. So don't feel bad that you're calling me on a cell phone. That's not a problem. But you can reach me at that number or by that email address. And if you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in chat. I'll wait for a minute or two. And if not, we're done with the presentation. Oh, William, thanks a lot, Alex. Yeah, no problem, everyone. I hope this is helpful. And again, if you are running into any issue, have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to help. Brand new clerk, I'll be calling you. Sounds good to me. All right, looks like we have no more questions, so I guess Grace, we can just say thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bill.